Wait.
I pressed the letter against my chest and squeezed my eyes shut. My fingers were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. The ink had smeared from where my tears had fallen on the paper, but the words were still clear enough to slice through me like a blade. I am to be married to another. Do not write to me again. Lord Percival Drummond, the man I had given everything to, the man who had whispered promises into my hair on cold winter nights, who had kissed my hands like I was something precious, something worth keeping. He was gone, just like that. And I was still here, standing in the middle of my small room, with no family, no fortune, and a secret so heavy it had already started bending my knees. I was with child, his child. 3 mornings of sickness had told me before I even had the courage to admit it to myself. And now, holding his farewell letter in one hand and my entire collapsed future in the other, I understood something that terrified me completely. I had only one option left. One name kept pushing itself into my thoughts, uninvited and sharp. Duke Caspian Morvain, the man society called wicked, the man who had ruined 3 noblemen in a single season without blinking, cold, calculating, and powerful in ways that made even lords step aside when he entered a room. He was dangerous. But danger, I was learning, sometimes wore a more honest face than love did. I folded the letter, straightened my spine, and made a decision that would either save my life or end it completely. I was going to find the Duke. Now here is what I need you to think about. If the one you loved abandoned you in your most vulnerable moment, would you have been brave enough to do the same? Drop your answer in the comments and tell us where you are watching from. It means everything to us. And if this story already has you feeling something, please hit that subscribe button right now. Trust me, you do not want to miss what comes next. I stood outside the iron gates of Morvain Manor and almost turned back 3 times. The building rose against the grey morning sky like something out of a warning tale. Black stone walls, tall, narrow windows that seemed to watch you approach. Ivy climbed up the sides like it was trying to strangle the place. The gates themselves were twice my height, cold to the touch, and bearing the Morvain family crest, a wolf with its teeth bared. I touched my stomach once, just briefly, through the fabric of my dress. That small reminder was the only thing that kept my feet moving forward. The butler who opened the gate looked at me the way people look at something they cannot quite categorize. I was not dressed like a beggar, but I was not grand enough to demand entrance either. I was somewhere in the uncomfortable middle, a woman of decent birth with a crumbling situation and a secret that was growing heavier by the hour. "Miss Lottie Vane," I said, and then immediately corrected myself because that was my old name, the name attached to the life that had just fallen apart. "Miss Charlotte Pemroy, I am here to see the Duke." The butler raised one eyebrow so slowly it felt theatrical. "His Grace does not receive unannounced visitors, Miss Pemroy." "He will receive me," I said, with far more certainty than I felt. "Please tell him it concerns Lord Percival Drummond." Something shifted in the butler's expression. Just a flicker. But it was enough. He stepped aside without another word and led me through the gate. The inside of Morvain Manor was not what I expected. I had prepared myself for dark rooms and the smell of decay. or for cobwebs and gloom and all the things people attached to the Duke's reputation. Instead, I walked into a house that was immaculate. Cold, yes, but immaculate. High ceilings painted with faded murals, marble floors that clicked under my heels, portraits lining the corridor walls, stern faces watching me pass, each one bearing some version of the same sharp jaw and unreadable eyes. I was seated in a receiving room and left alone for 11 minutes. I counted. When the door finally opened, I stood up so quickly I nearly knocked over the chair behind me. Duke Caspian Morvain was not what the whispers had built him to be. And yet he was somehow worse. He was tall, broader than I imagined, with dark hair that was not quite groomed and not quite wild. His jaw was set hard. His eyes were grey, not warm grey, but the grey of sky before a storm decides what it wants to do. He wore no smile. He offered no greeting. He simply walked to the chair across from mine, sat down, and looked at me the way someone looks at a problem they haven't yet decided whether to solve or discard. "Miss Pemroy," he said. His voice was low and even. "You mentioned Drummond." "Yes," I said. "Then speak." I had rehearsed this moment for 2 days. I had practiced the words in my small room, standing in front of the mirror, trying to find a version of the truth that did not make me sound pathetic or desperate. But sitting across from him now, under the weight of those grey eyes, every rehearsed sentence evaporated. So I told him the truth, plain and undecorated. I told him that Lord Percival Drummond had courted me in secret for 7 months, that he had made promises, that I had believed him because I was foolish enough to think that a man who quoted poetry in candlelight actually meant the words he was saying. I told him about the letter. I told him about the mornings I had spent sick and frightened and alone. And then I told him about the child. I did not cry. I had made a decision before walking through his gates that I wouldn't cry in front of this man. Tears would make me look like I was asking for pity. I was not asking for pity. I was asking for something far more complicated. When I finished, the Duke said nothing for a long moment. He simply looked at me. Then he reached forward, poured himself a glass of water from the decanter on the table between us, and drank half of it slowly. "What exactly do you want from me?" he asked. "Protection," I said, "and legitimacy, but for the child." He set the glass down. "You are asking me to claim another man's child. I am asking you to enter into an arrangement that benefits us both," I said. "I know what Percival did to your family. I know he testified against your brother in court. I know your brother lost everything because of his words. I'm carrying Percival's child. If you protect me, give this child a name, you will have something far more valuable than revenge. You will have evidence, a living, breathing consequence of everything he tried to hide." The Duke was very still. I pressed forward because stillness in a man like him was not the same as refusal. "I am not asking you to love me. I am not asking you to pretend. I am asking you to be practical. You are practical, Your Grace. Everyone in London knows that." He stood up. I thought he was going to tell me to leave. I braced for it. Instead, he walked to the window and stood there with his back to me, looking out at the grey morning. "Who else knows about the child?" he asked. "No one." "Your household staff?" "I have no household staff. I leased 2 rooms from a widow on Harding Street." He turned then, just slightly, enough that I could see the edge of his profile. "You came here alone?" No chaperone. No letter of introduction. I had no time for protocol, I said, and no one left to write me a letter. He looked at me fully then, and for just a moment, something moved across his face that I could not name. It was not sympathy. It was not contempt either. It was something quieter and more complicated than both. "Go back to your rooms," he said finally. "Tell no one you were here. I will send word by tomorrow morning." I rose. "And if your word does not come?" "It will come," he said simply. I believed him. I did not know why, but I believed him. I left Morvain Manor with my back straight and my hands clasped in front of me, and I didn't let myself breathe properly until I had turned the corner at the end of the street. Then I stopped against a wall and pressed both palms flat to the cold stone and exhaled like I had been holding everything inside since the moment I knocked on those iron gates. Whatever came next, I had set something in motion that could not be undone. And somewhere beneath the fear, beneath the grief and the exhaustion, and the impossible weight of the situation I had built around myself, there was something else, something small and stubborn and embarrassingly alive. Hope. I hated that I felt it, but I felt it all the same. The widow I rented my room from, Mrs. Alderton, was waiting at the bottom of the stairs when I returned. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and a habit of knowing things she had no business knowing. She looked at me the way she always did when she suspected I had been somewhere interesting. "You have a visitor," she said. My stomach dropped. "Who?" "A young man. Well dressed. He would not give his name." I put him in the sitting room. I walked past her and pushed open the sitting room door, and there he was. Percival's younger brother, Mr. Theo Drummond, sitting on the edge of the chair with his hat in his hands and guilt written all over his face. He was 19. He had always been kind to me when his brother brought me around during those secret months. Now he looked like a boy who had been sent to do something he did not want to do. "Miss Pemroy," he said, standing quickly, "I am sorry to come without warning. Percy does not know I am here." "Then why are you here, Theo?" He looked at his hat. "Because I know what he did. And I know about... I heard something, and I wanted to. I am not sure what I wanted." He looked up. "Are you all right?" The question was so genuine it almost broke something in me. Almost. "I am managing," I said carefully. "He is to be married in 6 weeks, Theo said, and his voice cracked on the last word, like even he could not quite believe it. "To Lady Gwendolen Fitch. Her father owns half of Derbyshire. Percy has been planning it for over a year." Over a year. While he was quoting poetry to me in candlelight, he had been planning to marry someone else for over a year. I sat down because my legs made the decision before my pride could stop them. Theo sat down across from me. I cannot fix what he did. I know that. But if there is anything at all, please, I want to help. I looked at this boy with his guilty eyes and his crumpled hat and his too-late apology, and I made a decision about him. Theo Drummond was not his brother. He never had been. "Can you keep a secret?" I asked. He nodded immediately. "Then sit down," I said, "and listen very carefully." I did not tell him everything, but I told him enough. I told him I had found someone who might help, that there was a plan forming, that he should go home, act normal, say nothing, and wait. When he left, he paused at the door. "Miss Pemroy, for what it is worth, you are the best thing my brother ever did not deserve." He was gone before I could respond. I sat in that small sitting room for a long time after he left, with the silence pressing in around me. Outside the window, London went on with its business. Carts and voices and the distant sound of bells. Everything carried on as though the world had not just shifted beneath my feet. I placed my hand on my stomach again. "It is going to be all right," I whispered. Not because I was certain, but because one of us needed to believe it, and you were too small yet to take on that responsibility. The Duke's message arrived before sunrise. Mrs. Alderton knocked on my door while the sky was still the colour of ash, and when I opened it, she pressed a sealed letter into my hands without a word and went back downstairs with the particular dignity of a woman who had decided not to ask questions. I broke the seal. The handwriting was precise and economical, like the man himself. 3 sentences only. "Come to Morvain Manor at 9 o'clock. Use the side entrance on Cartwell Lane. Tell no one." I dressed quickly, ate nothing because my stomach would not allow it, and arrived at the side entrance of Morvain Manor at 4 minutes past 9. A woman was waiting for me there. Not the butler. A woman, middle-aged, with a measuring look and a very straight spine. She introduced herself as Mrs. Fawcett, the Duke's housekeeper, and led me through a series of narrow corridors that clearly existed to move people through the house without them being seen. I was brought to a private study, smaller than the receiving room from the day before. Warmer, too. A fire was already burning, and there were papers spread across the wide oak desk. The Duke was standing when I entered, and he did not sit down until I had taken the chair across from him, which was either good manners or strategy. With him, I was beginning to think most things were strategy. "I have been thinking about your proposal," he said. "And?" "It has merit," he said, "under specific conditions." "Tell me the conditions." He leaned back slightly. "We marry within the fortnight, quietly. A private ceremony with minimal witnesses. The child will carry the Morvain name. There will be no public discussion of the timeline of our courtship. We will present ourselves as having been privately acquainted for several months. And in return? In return, you give me full access to whatever correspondence you have from Percival Drummond. Letters. Any written promises. Any documentation of your acquaintance." His eyes held mine steadily. "I intend to bury him, Miss Pemroy. Not physically, but in every way that matters to a man like him. Socially, financially, legally if the opportunity arises. What he did to my brother will not go unanswered." I thought of the letters. There were 14 of them, locked in a box beneath the floorboard in my room. Percival had always been careless with words on paper. He had written things no man planning to marry someone else should ever have committed to ink. "You will have them," I said. He nodded once. Then he said something I did not expect. "I want to be clear about something. This arrangement is practical. I will not pretend otherwise. But I do not intend to be cruel to you. You will be treated with respect in this house. You will want for nothing material. What I cannot offer you is warmth. I want you to understand that before you agree." I studied his face, that hard jaw, those careful grey eyes, the absolute absence of performance in anything he said. "I am not here looking for warmth, Your Grace," I said quietly. "I have learned recently what warmth from the wrong person actually costs." Something moved in his expression, fleeting, like a shadow crossing a wall. Then it was gone. "There is one more thing," he said. He opened a drawer and removed a document, sliding it across the desk toward me. "This is an agreement outlining the terms of the arrangement. You should read it before you sign. I have had my solicitor draw it up this morning." I picked it up. It was 3 pages long. I read every word. The provisions were fair, more than fair. The child's inheritance was protected regardless of what happened between us. I was granted a personal allowance. There was a clause that gave me the right to leave the arrangement after 2 years if I chose, with the child's name and rights fully intact. I looked up. "You had this drawn up this morning?" "I had it drawn up last night," he said, "after you left," which meant he had already decided before I walked back through his door. He had made up his mind in that receiving room, staring out at the grey morning. One simply needed to verify one more time that I was serious. I picked up the pen on his desk and signed my name. He signed beneath it without ceremony. "I will need 2 days to arrange the ceremony," he said. "In the meantime, you will move into the manor. I will send a carriage and 2 of my staff to assist you this afternoon." "I do not have much to move," I said. "Then it will not take long." I stood to leave. Then I stopped because there was something I needed to ask. Something that had been sitting at the edge of my thoughts since the day before. "Why did Percival testify against your brother?" I asked. "What did your brother actually do?" The Duke looked at me for a moment. "My brother, Lord Dorian Morvane, discovered that Percival had been falsifying land inheritance documents. Dorian was going to bring it to the courts. And Percival moved faster. He had Dorian accused of forgery instead, using documents Percival himself had manufactured. My brother lost his title, his estate, and his freedom for 14 months before the truth began to surface. And now? Dorian is in Edinburgh, rebuilding. But a man cannot fully rebuild what was taken from him, the way it was taken from him. His voice remained even throughout, but his hand on the desk had curled very slightly. I have been patient. I have been strategic. I have been waiting for the right moment. And I am the right moment, I said. You are, he said simply. There was no apology in it. But there was no malice toward me either. He was a man who told the truth, plainly, even when the truth was uncomfortable. After Percival, who had dressed every lie in beautiful language, there was something almost startling about that. I left the study and followed Mrs. Fawcett back through the narrow corridors. As we walked, she spoke without looking at me. The manor has 17 rooms in regular use, she said. Your personal chambers are in the east wing. Breakfast is served at 8. Dinner at 7 unless His Grace is entertaining, in which case it moves to 8. I will walk you through the rest of the house when you arrive this afternoon. Mrs. Fawcett, I said. She stopped and looked at me. Does this surprise you? This arrangement? She considered the question with great seriousness. His Grace does very little that surprises me any more, Miss Pemroy. But I will tell you this. He had the east wing chambers freshened and the fireplace cleaned at 6 this morning. He had the cook prepare a full pantry list, and he asked me 3 separate times whether the rooms were comfortable enough. She held my gaze for just a moment. Make of that what you will. She walked on. I followed her, turning those small details over in my mind like stones. The carriage came for me that afternoon. 2 of the Duke's footmen helped carry my things, which were embarrassingly few. Mrs. Alderton watched from the doorway of her house with wide eyes and 1,000 unasked questions on her face. I thanked her for her kindness. She grabbed my hand and pressed it firmly. "Be careful," she said, quietly enough that the footman could not hear. "Powerful men are powerful men, no matter how fine the house is." "I know," I said. What I did not say was that I had already learned that lesson from a man who was not even particularly powerful. Power was not the thing to fear. It was the hidden intentions behind the smile that undid you. And the Duke, whatever else he was, didn't smile. I arrived at Morvain Manor as a future duchess, with 2 trunks, 14 letters locked in a wooden box, a child growing quietly inside me, and a heart that was still bruised from the last man I had trusted. In the corridor outside my new chambers, I passed a girl of about 16, carrying a stack of folded linens. She stopped and looked at me with open curiosity, no pretense about it. "You must be her," she said. "I must be," I agreed. "I am Bet," she said. "I am one of the parlour maids. Mrs. Fawcett will have me scrubbing floors for a month if she hears me talking to you in the corridor like this." She did not move. I almost smiled. "Then perhaps talk quickly." "Is it true you are going to marry him?" she asked. "It appears so." Bet looked at me with the frank assessment that only very young people and very old people ever managed. "He is not as frightening as they say," she said. "He shouted once, last winter, when a visiting lord was rude to one of the kitchen girls. He made him leave the house in the dark." She shifted the linens in her arms. "That is the only time I ever heard him raise his voice. And it was not at us." She moved on before I could respond. I stood in the corridor of Morvain Manor, outside the chambers that were now mine, in a house that was not supposed to be part of any version of my future, carrying a child that was not supposed to exist yet, about to marry a man the world called wicked. And somehow, for the first time in weeks, the fear was not the loudest thing inside me. I opened the door to my chambers. The fire was burning. The room was warm. On the small table beside the window, someone had placed a pot of tea and a plate of plain biscuits, as though they had known that my stomach was too unsettled for anything else. I stood there for a moment, looking at that tea. Then I sat down, poured myself a cup, and began to think about what came next. The wedding happened on a Thursday. There were 4 witnesses: Mrs. Fawcett, the Duke's personal solicitor, Mr. Clarence Hobbs, a quiet clergyman named Reverend Sutton, who asked no unnecessary questions, and Bet, who cried through the entire ceremony and then looked mortified about it afterward. I wore no veil. The Duke wore no expression that I could read. We stood before Reverend Sutton in the small chapel attached to the east side of the manor, spoke our vows in low, clear voices, and signed the register while the morning light came through the narrow chapel windows and fell across the stone floor in pale strips. When it was done, the Duke looked at me and said, "You are all right?" "Yes," I said. "Good," he said. And that was the entirety of our wedding conversation. What I did not expect was what happened at breakfast afterward, though the Duke sat at the head of the long dining table. I sat to his right. Mrs. Fawcett had arranged for a proper breakfast: warm bread, soft eggs, stewed fruit, and tea so strong it almost had an opinion. The Duke ate steadily and read correspondence while he did it, which should have felt rude, but somehow felt honest instead. He was not performing comfort. He did not feel. Then he set a letter down, looked at me directly, and said, "My brother is coming." I set my teacup down carefully. "When?" "End of the week. I wrote to him the night you signed the agreement. He deserves to know what is happening before London finds out." "Does he know about the child?" "He knows everything," the Duke said. "Dorian is not a man who functions well on partial information. Neither do I. I thought about meeting this man. Lord Dorian Morvain, who had been destroyed by Percival's lies and spent 14 months paying for a crime he did not commit, who is now rebuilding himself in Edinburgh while his younger brother sharpened knives in London. Is he angry?" I asked. "He is always angry," the Duke said simply, "but not at you." That afternoon, I gave him the box. 14 letters, tied in 2 bundles. I placed them on his desk without ceremony and stepped back. He untied the first bundle slowly, unfolded the top letter, and began to read. His face changed in small, controlled ways as his eyes moved across the page. A slight tightening around the jaw, a stillness that was different from his usual stillness, sharper, colder. He read through all 14 without stopping. When he finished, he set them down, aligned their edges neatly, and looked up at me. "What he wrote to you about the land," he said. "He talked freely," I said. "He trusted that I would never be in a position to use any of it." "He was wrong," the Duke said. "He underestimated me," I said. "Men like him always do." Something shifted in the Duke's grey eyes. Not warmth exactly, but something adjacent to respect, which from him felt significant. "These 3 letters alone," he said, tapping the second bundle, "contain enough for my solicitor to reopen Dorian's case. Percival references the land documents directly. He references the court testimony. He was extraordinarily careless." "He was comfortable," I said. "Comfortable people stop being careful." The Duke leaned back in his chair and looked at me with an expression I had not seen on him before. Thoughtful, almost curious. "How old are you?" he asked. 22, I said. He nodded slowly, as though that answered something else he had not actually asked. That evening, I was in the East Wing sitting room when Mrs. Fawcett appeared at the door with a face that had changed shape somehow. Her composure was intact, but only barely. "There is a visitor at the front gate," she said. "A woman. She says her name is Lady Gwendolen Fitch." The name hit me like cold water. Percival's intended. The woman he was to marry in 5 weeks. The woman whose father owned half of Derbyshire. "What does she want?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "She asked to speak with the new Duchess of Morvain," Mrs. Fawcett said, and for just a moment something fierce and loyal flickered in the housekeeper's eyes. "She does not look friendly." "Send her to the receiving room," I said. "Tell her I will be 5 minutes." I was 4. Lady Gwendolen Fitch was tall, angular, and polished to a painful degree. She was perhaps 25, with the kind of beauty that came with absolute confidence in its own effect. She looked at me when I entered with an expression that was trying very hard to be composed and not quite managing it. "So you are the woman," she said, without preamble. "I am the Duchess of Morvain," I said, and sat down across from her. "You have the advantage of knowing who I am. I know only your name." She studied me. "I came to warn you." "That is interesting," I said. "Most people come to warn me about your fiancé, not on his behalf." Her jaw tightened. "I am not here on his behalf. I am here because I have been engaged to Percival Drummond for 11 months, and 2 days ago his solicitor informed me that there may be legal complications arising from his past." She paused. "I need to know how serious they are." I looked at her carefully. There was something underneath the polish. Something that looked like a woman who had begun to suspect she had been lied to and was trying to decide how much truth she could handle. "How long have you known Percival?" I asked. 18 months. "And in those 18 months, did you ever feel that he was entirely honest with you?" The silence that followed was its own answer. "He told me the Morvain situation was resolved," she said quietly, "that the Duke bore him no real ill will, that the brother's case was closed." "None of that is true," I said. She looked at her gloved hands. "No," she said softly. "I am beginning to understand that. I made a decision then, the kind that feels either very right or very foolish, and you cannot tell which until later." "Lady Fitch," I said, "I think you and I may be more useful to each other than either of us expected." She looked up. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I have 14 letters written by Percival Drummond that are about to be handed to a solicitor. And I think you may have information that would make those letters even more damaging than they already are." Her eyes widened slightly. Then she straightened, and something new settled into her expression. It was not warmth. It was not friendship. It was the particular cold clarity of a woman who had just realized she had been made a fool of and was now deciding what to do about it. "Tell me what you need," she said. "When the Duke came to the sitting room that evening, I told him about Lady Fitch's visit. He went very still in the way he did when information was rearranging itself inside him. 'She came here voluntarily,' he said. 'She did.' 'And she is willing to cooperate?' 'She is,' I said. 'She has letters, too. Different ones. And she knows something about the Derbyshire property transfers that she says her father's solicitor flagged 2 months ago and Percival persuaded him to ignore.' The Duke was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, 'You managed that in 20 minutes. "'She was ready to be managed,' I said. "She was already halfway there when she walked through the gate. She just needed someone to open the door the rest of the way." He looked at me. That long, measuring look that I was beginning to learn was not coldness. It was simply how he processed things that surprised him. "You are not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" "A frightened woman in a desperate situation." "I am a frightened woman in a desperate situation," I said. "I am simply also other things at the same time." He almost smiled. Not quite. But the corners of his mouth moved in a direction they had not moved before, and I noted it carefully and said nothing about it. That night I lay in my warm chambers and listened to the manor settle around me, the creak of old wood, the distant sound of wind against the tall windows. Somewhere in this house, a clock struck 11, and then the silence swallowed it. I pressed my hand against my stomach. "Your father does not know about you yet," I whispered. "Percival. But he is about to find out what happens when the things he buried start climbing back up." Lord Dorian Morvain arrived on a Friday afternoon in a hired coach that had seen better decades. He was taller than the Duke, which I had not anticipated, and leaner, with the particular look of a man who had survived something and not quite finished deciding how he felt about having survived it. He had the same grey eyes as his brother, but where the Duke's eyes were controlled and measured, Dorian's were raw and restless, like a fire that had been banked but not extinguished. He came through the front door, dropped his bag without ceremony, looked at me standing in the entrance hall and said, You must be the woman who walked into my brother's house with Percival Drummond's letters." "I am," I said. "Good," he said. "I have waited a long time for those letters to exist." He embraced his brother briefly, not the kind of embrace between men who do not do it often and mean it completely when they do. Then Mrs. Fawcett appeared, declared that lunch was waiting, and herded all three of us toward the dining room with the authority of a woman who had been managing Morvain men far too long to be intimidated by any of them. Over lunch, Dorian talked. He talked the way people do when they have been quiet too long and suddenly have an audience they trust. He talked about Edinburgh, about the small legal work he had been doing under a borrowed name, about the people who had quietly believed in him and the ones who had turned away the moment his title was stripped. He talked about the 14 months in a holding situation that was not quite a prison but wasn't quite not one either. He did not look at me while he spoke. He looked at his plate, out at the window, at his brother. But I understood that he was speaking for my benefit as much as anyone's. He was letting me know what was at stake, what had been lost, what Percival Drummond had actually done when he manufactured those documents and stood in that courtroom and lied. When he finished, the table was quiet. Then he looked at me directly for the first time. "My brother says you are clever," he said. "Your brother said that?" Dorian glanced at the Duke with something like amusement. In his way. I looked at the Duke. He was cutting his bread with great focus. "I want to help," I said to Dorian, "not just for the arrangement, not just for myself or for the child. What was done to you was wrong, and I have 14 reasons in a wooden box why that wrongness can finally be addressed." Dorian studied me for a long moment. "My brother chose well," he said quietly. "He chose practically," I said. "Sometimes," Dorian said. "Those are the same thing." That evening, while Dorian and the Duke worked through the letters with Mr. Hobbs in the study, I slipped out to the garden. The night air was cold and clear, and the sky was the particular dark blue of very late evening. I sat on the stone bench near the garden wall and breathed slowly. I heard footsteps behind me and turned. It was not the Duke. It was a man I didn't recognize, which sent alarm through me instantly, because the garden gates were locked at dusk. Mrs. Fawcett had told me that specifically. He was perhaps 40, with a heavy build and a coat that was too fine for someone who had climbed a wall. He stopped when he saw me looking at him and raised both hands slightly. Her gesture meant to communicate non-threat, which immediately made me more alarmed. "I am not here to harm you," he said. "Then you should have used the front door," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I could not use the front door," he said. "My name is Mr. Silas Quint. I was Lord Dorian Morvain's personal secretary before the trial. I have been trying to reach the Duke for 3 weeks. His staff turns me away. I was not certain who else to try." I looked at him carefully. "Why does his staff turn you away?" "Because Percival Drummond told them I was not to be trusted," he said. And enough of the old guard believed him. He reached into his coat and removed a folded envelope. "I have a document. I found it 8 months ago while sorting through the estate papers that were seized during Dorian's case. It was misfiled. Deliberately, I think. It is the original land agreement. The real one. Before Percival altered it." My heart began moving faster. "You have been carrying this for 8 months?" "I did not know who to give it to," he said. "I did not know who to trust. And I was afraid." He said the last part plainly, without shame. Percival has powerful friends. He ruined Dorian with nothing but words and manufactured paper. What might he do to someone like me? I stood up. "Come inside," I said. "Right now, through the back corridor. I am going to bring you directly to the Duke." Silas Quint looked at me with the expression of a man who had been afraid for so long that being trusted felt almost physical. "You believe me?" "I believe," I said carefully. "Well, that desperate people do not usually climb garden walls in the dark to tell comfortable lies." I held out my hand for the envelope. "May I?" He handed it to me. I tucked it into the fold of my shawl and led him through the back corridor of Morvain Manor, through the kitchen, where two startled kitchen maids pressed themselves against the counter, past the linen room, and straight to the study door. I knocked once and opened it without waiting. 3 men looked up from the table covered in letters. The Duke, Dorian, Mr. Hobbs. "This is Mr. Silas Quint," I said. He was Dorian's secretary. He's been carrying the original land agreement for 8 months and has been trying to reach you for 3 weeks. I placed the envelope on the table in front of the Duke. He climbed the garden wall. Dorian stood up so fast, his chair scraped the floor. He stared at Silas Quint with an expression that moved through several things very quickly before settling on something raw and stunned. "Silas," he said. Just that. "My lord," Silas said quietly, and then, with the exhaustion of a man who had been holding something too heavy for too long, "I am sorry it took me this long." The Duke opened the envelope, unfolded the document inside, read it, passed it to Mr. Hobbs, who read it with the focused expression of a man watching an entire case reorganize itself in real time. "This is the original," Mr. Hobbs said. He looked up. "This combined with the letters is enough. More than enough." The room was very quiet. Then the Duke looked at me, and this time the thing in his expression was clear and unmistakable. It was not a practical consideration. It was not measured with respect. It was something that had not been there in the receiving room, or the study, or across the breakfast table. Something newer and less controlled than everything else about him. "You found him," he said. "He found me," I said. "I just opened the door." Dorian laughed. It was short and surprising, and the most human sound I had heard in that house since I arrived. Even Mr. Hobbs allowed himself a small smile. Silas Quint sat down in the nearest chair, as though his legs had simply given up holding him upright. Later, much later, when Silas had been given a room for the night, and Dorian and Mr. Hobbs were still working through the documents with the focused energy of men who could now finally see the finishing line, the Duke walked me to the East Wing corridor. He stopped outside my door. "You should rest," he said, "for the child." "I know," I said. He nodded, turned to leave, then stopped. "Lady Fitch," he said, without turning back. "You said she has information about the Derbyshire property transfers." "She does. Can you arrange a meeting, formal, documented, with Hobbs present?" "Yes," I said. He nodded again, still not turning. "Charlotte," he said. It was the first time he had used my given name. It landed differently than I expected. Quieter, more careful. "Yes," I said. "What you did tonight," he said. "Bringing Silas in, making that decision alone, in the dark, in a locked garden, with a stranger." He paused. "That was either extraordinarily brave or extraordinarily reckless." "Can it not be both?" I asked. This time he did turn, and the thing in his expression was unmistakable now, and regardless of what either of us intended to do about it. "Good night, Charlotte," he said. "Good night, Your Grace," I said. He walked away down the corridor. I stood at my door and watched him go, and told myself very firmly that whatever was beginning to happen inside my chest had no place in a practical arrangement. I told myself that twice more before I finally went inside. I did not entirely believe it either time. The meeting with Lady Gwendolen Fitch happened on a Monday morning. She arrived at Morvain Manor in a carriage that announced money without apology, stepped out with the composure of a woman who had spent the weekend making decisions, and walked into the formal sitting room where Mr. Hobbs was already seated with his papers arranged and his pen ready. I sat beside the Duke. That was new. Every other meeting I had attended in this house, I had entered alone or been brought in after the fact. This time the Duke had knocked on my chamber door at 8:30 and said simply, "You should be in the room for this. You arranged it." So I sat beside him, and Lady Gwendolen Fitch sat across from us, and for a moment the four of us simply looked at each other across the table with the particular tension of people who all know something significant is about to happen. Then Lady Fitch opened her own bag and placed a bundle of letters on the table, thicker than mine had been. 23, she said. All from Percival. Several reference the Derbyshire transfers directly. 3 of them mention a man named Mr. Foster Crail, who I believe was the intermediary he used to move the altered documents through the county records office. Mr. Hobbs made a sound that was almost reverent. Foster Crail, the Duke said quietly, and something in the name clearly meant something to him. "You know him?" I asked. "He was at the trial," the Duke said. "He gave a character statement supporting Percival, but I always suspected he was involved beyond that." Lady Fitch looked at the Duke steadily. "I want something in return," she said. "Name it," the Duke said. "When this becomes public, and I understand it will become public, I want it clearly documented that I cooperated willingly, that I came forward. I will not be painted as a woman who was complicit in what Percival did simply because I was engaged to him." Her voice was controlled, but underneath it was the particular tremor of a woman whose dignity was on the line. "I had no knowledge of the fraud. I want that on record." "It will be," the Duke said. "You have my word." She nodded once. Then she looked at me. "And for what it is worth," she said carefully, "I am sorry for what he did to you, what he did to all of you." It was not a comfortable thing for her to say. I could see that, which made it mean more. "Thank you," I said. After she left, Mr. Hobbs gathered everything with barely contained excitement and announced he would have a formal submission ready for the courts within the week. Dorian, who had been standing near the window throughout the entire meeting, turned around with an expression that was difficult to look at directly because of how much was in it. "It is almost over," he said. Not triumphantly, just quietly. Like a man who had been underwater for a very long time and had just broken the surface. The Duke crossed the room and put his hand on his brother's shoulder. He said nothing. He did not need to. 3 days later, Percival Drummond received a formal legal notice. I was not there when it happened. But Theo came to the manor that same evening, having heard from a household servant, pale-faced and slightly breathless, and told me everything. Percival had read the notice in his study, had gone very still, had then knocked an entire shelf of books to the floor, and had spent the rest of the afternoon demanding his own solicitor explain how this was possible. His solicitor, apparently, had no good answer. He knows it was you, Theo said, looking at me carefully. He does not know about the Duke yet. He thinks you acted alone. Good, I said. Let him think that for now. Theo twisted his hat in his hands. He had a habit of doing that when he was working up to something. Miss Pem, Your Grace. He stopped, looked at me. That is very strange to say. It is strange to hear, I agreed. What were you going to say, Theo? He is going to come for you, he said quietly. When he finds out everything, when he understands the full shape of what is happening, he is not going to accept it. Percy does not accept things. He dismantles them. I looked at this 19-year-old boy with his guilty conscience and his loyal heart, and I felt something fierce and protective toward him that had nothing to do with the situation and everything to do with who he simply was. He is welcome to try, I said. Theo blinked. Then something in his expression settled into something new. Steadier. All right then, he said. What do I do? You go home, I said. You watch, you listen. And if he begins making moves, you tell me immediately. He nodded. I can do that. After he left, I went to find the Duke. He was in the garden, at which surprised me because I had not yet seen him use the garden for anything other than walking through it to reach the carriage house. He was standing near the stone wall, looking at nothing in particular, with his coat on and his hands behind his back. I walked out and stood beside him. The evening air was cold and clean. The garden was bare in the way of late season, but there was something honest about it, all structure and no pretense. Theo thinks Percival will retaliate, I said. He will, the Duke said. I have been expecting it. Are you prepared? I have been prepared for this for 2 years, he said. He turned to look at me. In the evening light, something about his face was different. The hardness was still there, but it sat differently, like armor that had been loosened slightly at the edges. What I was not prepared for, he said, was you. I looked at him carefully. What do you mean? He was quiet for a moment, in the particular way of someone choosing words with great precision. When you came through my gate that morning, he said, I saw a desperate woman in an impossible situation. I saw utility. I saw a means to an end that I had been seeking for a long time. He paused. I did not see someone who would bring me Silas Quint through the kitchen in the dark. I did not see someone who would sit across from Lady Fitch and turn a confrontation into an alliance in 20 minutes. I did not see someone who would sign my contract and then read every word of it first. You noticed that, I said. I notice everything, he said simply. I looked at the bare garden. My heart was doing something inconvenient, and I was trying to decide whether to acknowledge it or manage it into silence. Caspian, I said. It was the first time I had used his given name, and we both heard it land in the space between us. He did not correct me. The child, I said. I need to ask you something I should have asked before I signed your document. Ask, he awed. When the child is born, I said, and when all of this is finished, and when the dust has settled, and there is no more utility in the arrangement, what happens then? Will you look at this child and see Percival? Will you resent what you agreed to? Because I can survive many things. I survived him leaving. I can survive a cold arrangement. But I cannot allow my child to grow up in a house where they are tolerated instead of wanted. The silence afterward was long enough that my chest began to tighten. Then the Duke turned to face me fully. "I have thought about this child," he said, "more than you might expect. I thought about it the night you left, after our first meeting. I thought about what it means to give a child a name, what that name carries, what it requires." He held my gaze steadily. "I do not do things in halves, Charlotte. I never have. If this child carries my name, this child is mine, not in arrangement, not on paper, mine completely, whatever they look like, whoever they become." My eyes were burning. I did not let them spill over. "You are certain?" I asked. "I signed the document," he said. "But I had already decided before I signed it. The document was for you, so you would have something to hold if I ever became someone you needed protection from." His jaw tightened slightly. "I am aware of what I look like to people. I am aware of my reputation. I wanted you to have something concrete in your hands." I thought about what Mrs. Fawcett had said on my first morning, about the fire cleaned at 6, about the tea asked after 3 times, about the way powerful men showed things sideways when they did not know how to show them directly. "You are not what they say you are," I said softly. "I am exactly what they say I am," he said. "I am ruthless. I am strategic. I do not forgive easily, and I do not forget at all." He paused. "But I am also," he said slowly, like the words were unfamiliar in his mouth, "trying to be something else. Alongside those things." The garden was very quiet. I reached out and placed my hand over his where it rested against the stone wall. He looked down at our hands. Then he turned his over slowly and held mine properly, carefully, like something he did not want to mishandle. We stood like that for a long time without speaking. It was the most honest moment I had experienced since the world fell apart. And it was with the man no one had warned me to trust. Percival came on a Wednesday. He did not knock. He arrived at the front gates of Morvane Manor in a carriage with his personal solicitor and a man I did not recognize, but who had the look of someone hired to be large and present. He demanded entry. The gate staff sent word inside immediately. The Duke received the message at breakfast, read it, folded it neatly, and looked at me across the table. "He is at the gate," he said. "I know," I said. I had been expecting it since Theo's visit. "You do not have to be in the room," he said. "Yes, I do," I said. He looked at me for a moment. Then he nodded and sent word to bring Percival through. Dorian positioned himself in the corner of the receiving room without being asked. Mr. Hobbs sat to one side with his papers. Mrs. Fawcett stood outside the door in the corridor, which I understood was her way of making herself available without overstepping. Percival walked in, and the first thing I noticed was how diminished he looked. Not physically. He was still well dressed, still handsome in the sharp way he had always been, but something in him had contracted. The certainty that had always radiated off him like heat was flickering at the edges. He saw me and stopped moving. Then he saw the Duke standing at my side, and something crossed his face that I had never seen there before. Fear. Real, cold, genuine fear. "Charlotte," he said. His voice tried for something authoritative and landed somewhere much less than that. "Lord Drummond," I said. He looked around the room, took in Dorian, took in Mr. Hobbs and his papers, took in the Duke, who was simply standing with his hands behind his back and his grey eyes level and absolutely unreadable. "This is a performance," Percival said, rallying. "Whatever documents you think you have, whatever story she has told you, this is a desperate woman manipulating a situation for her own survival." 14 letters, the Duke said quietly. All in your handwriting, all referencing the land transfers, 3 of them naming Foster Crail directly. Percival's face went still. 23 more letters, the Duke continued, provided by Lady Gwendolen Fitch, who came to this house voluntarily. And the original land agreement, before you altered it, what was recovered by a man named Silas Quint, who has been waiting 8 months for the right moment to come forward. The man Percival had brought with him for presence and size suddenly looked much less useful than he had outside. Dorian's case is being reopened, Mr. Hobbs said, without looking up from his papers. The submission was made to the court 4 days ago. We expect a hearing within the month. Percival looked at his own solicitor, who looked at the floor. Then Percival looked at me, and the fear shifted into something uglier. Something that had been there all along, underneath the poetry and the candlelight and the whispered promises. Something mean and cornered and small. You have destroyed yourself, he said to me. Whatever arrangement you think you have made, you are in a house with a man the whole of London fears, or you are carrying a child with no real father willing to claim it. You think this ends well for you? The child has a father, the Duke said. His voice had not changed volume or tone at all, which somehow made it more frightening than shouting would have been. The child is mine, legally, completely, and without qualification, and you will not speak about my wife or my child again in any room, in any company, at any volume. The word wife landed in the room like something dropped from a great height. Percival stared at the Duke, then at me, then back. You married him, he said, like he still could not process it. I did, I said. Something broke open in his expression then. Not remorse, not grief. Something more like the specific devastation of a man who has just understood that the person he underestimated has outmaneuvered him completely, and there is nothing left to do about it. His solicitor touched his arm. Percival shook him off. This is not finished, he said, but the words had lost their architecture. They were just sounds now. Yes, the Duke said simply. It is. Percival left. His large hired companion left. His solicitor shuffled out behind them, looking like a man considering a career change. The room breathed. Dorian sat down in the nearest chair and pressed both hands over his face. His shoulders shook once, twice, and then stilled. When he lifted his face, his eyes were bright, and his jaw was set, and he looked like a man returning from somewhere very far away. It is done, he said. Nearly, Mr. Hobbs said carefully. The hearing will confirm it formally. But the evidence is irrefutable. Foster Crail has already been approached by the court investigators. He is cooperating in exchange for leniency. Percival has nothing left to fight with. 3 weeks later, the hearing happened. I did not attend. The Duke said I should not, for the child's sake, and for once I agreed without argument. I waited at the manor with Mrs. Fawcett, who made tea at intervals with the focused energy of a woman who needed something to do with her hands, and with Bet, who sat near the window watching the gate and providing a running commentary on every carriage that passed. Silas Quint attended. Dorian attended. Mr. Hobbs attended. Lady Fitch submitted a written statement. Theo Drummond, to my quiet astonishment, submitted one too. A single page, or carefully worded, witnessed by 2 independent parties confirming what he knew of his brother's conduct. The Duke came home in the late afternoon. I was in the garden when I heard the carriage. I did not go inside immediately. I waited. I heard the front door, footsteps in the corridor. Then the garden door opened and he came out and walked across the frost-hardened ground toward me, and I read the answer in his face before he said a single word. "Dorian's conviction is overturned," he said. "His title and estate are to be restored. Percival has been formally charged. Foster Crail has confirmed everything. It will be in the papers by tomorrow." I sat down on the stone bench. My legs had simply decided. The Duke sat beside me. Not across from me the way he always positioned himself in rooms. Beside me, and close enough that our shoulders were almost touching. "It is over," I said. "That part is over," he said. I looked at him. "What part is not?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to face me, and his expression was the most open I had ever seen. All the careful architecture was still there, but the door in it was standing wide. "I told you when you came here that I could not offer warmth," he said, "that this was a practical arrangement, that you should understand that before you agree." "I remember," I said. "I was wrong," he said, simply, directly, in the way he said everything. "Not about who I am. I am still ruthless. I am still strategic. I still do not forgive easily." He paused. "But I was wrong about what I could offer. And I was wrong about what this was." My heart was very loud. "What is it then?" I asked quietly. "It is my life," he said. "If you want it. Not the arrangement. Not the document. My actual life, with you in it." He looked at my hand resting on the bench between us, and then, deliberately, covered it with his own. "And the child, who I have already decided is mine, and always will be, regardless of your answer to anything else I am about to say." I looked at our hands, his so certain and steady. Mine was still carrying the faint tremor that had been there since the morning I read Percival's letter in a cold corridor. "You are not saying this because the arrangement requires it?" I asked. "The arrangement requires nothing of this kind," he said. "You know that? You read every word." "I did," I said. "Then you know," he said, "that what I am saying right now is entirely outside the document, entirely outside the strategy." "Not entirely," he said, and his voice dropped slightly. "Outside anything I planned." I looked at him. This man who had frightened half of London, who had sharpened his grief into a weapon and waited 2 years for the right moment, who had cleaned a fireplace at 6 in the morning and asked 3 times whether the rooms were comfortable and signed a contract that protected me even from himself, who had stood beside me in a receiving room and called me his wife like it was the most natural word in the world. "Caspian," I said. "Yes," he said. "I think I stopped seeing this as an arrangement some time ago," I said. "I am not certain exactly when. Possibly the garden. Possibly the corridor outside my door. Possibly when you told me the child was yours completely, and your voice did not change at all when you said it." He looked at me for a long time. Then he raised my hand and pressed it to his lips, not the back of it, the way men did in drawing rooms as performance. The palm of it, warm and deliberate and entirely private. "Then we are in agreement," he said. "We are," I said. The winter garden was bare and cold around us, but I was not cold at all. 3 months later, our son was born on a Tuesday morning, just as the sun came up. He came into the world loud and furious and perfect, with a full head of dark hair and eyes that were still deciding what color they wanted to be. The Duke held him within the first 10 minutes. He sat in the chair beside my bed and held this small, furious person against his chest with the focused care of a man who understood that he was holding something irreplaceable. He did not say anything for a long time. He just looked at him. Then he looked at me. "He is extraordinary," he said. "He just arrived," I said. "He has not done anything yet." "He does not need to," the Duke said. "He simply needs to exist." We named him Edmund Dorian Morvain. Edmund for no particular reason, except that it suited him. Dorian for the uncle who came down from Edinburgh and cried in the corridor outside the room, and then denied it to everyone, including Bet, who had absolutely seen him. Theo Drummond sent flowers and a letter so long it took 3 pages. Mrs. Fawcett made a cake. Silas Quint, who had quietly become part of the household in the months since his garden wall entrance, carved a small wooden horse and left it outside the nursery door without signing his name, though everyone knew. Lady Fitch sent a brief, elegant note. She had broken her engagement to Percival months before the hearing and had recently been seen at several functions looking unburdened and remarkably well. I hoped she found something real eventually. She deserved better than what she had nearly settled for. Percival's formal proceedings continued through the courts. He did not come to Morvain Manor again. He did not write. The man who had quoted poetry in candlelight and promised things he never intended to keep was now answering for what he had built his comfort on. That was enough. I did not need to watch it, but I had already moved too far forward to spend time looking back. On the evening of Edmund's 3rd day in the world, when the house was quiet and the baby was sleeping, and the fire in our chamber was burning low, the Duke sat on the edge of the bed and looked at me with that expression that had started as something unreadable, and was now, for me at least, the clearest thing in the world. "Are you happy?" he asked, like he still needed to check, like it still mattered to him deeply that the answer was yes. I thought about the morning I had pressed a crumpled letter to my chest and slid down a cold wall with nowhere to go. I thought about the iron gates I had almost not walked through. I thought about the document I had signed on a practical morning that had somehow, through the particular alchemy of honest people in difficult circumstances, not become a life. "Yes," I said, "completely, without reservation." He lay down beside me, and we listened to our son breathe in the quiet of the room, and outside the window, London went on with its endless business, unknowing and indifferent, and inside that room there was nothing missing, nothing at all,